This is what peering really means. Peering nothing but connecting. So if I want to peer something, let me go into the virtual networks. I'll say this is virtual network. And once I go inside the virtual network out here, there are two things, East, West, and North Europe. You can go into any of the networks, not a problem, shouldn't be an issue. I'll go into the East, West 2 network. And if I just scroll down, there is something called peerings out here. I'll just go here and it says add a peering to get started. There's no peering out here for you. I'll say add a peering. It's telling for peering to work, two links must be created. By selecting remote virtual network, Azure will create both the links. What does it mean? Is that for your peering to properly work, this network called VNet1 should be able to talk to this network. This network should also be able to talk to this particular network, meaning I will create two links, one link here, the other link here. This link that I create here, which is link 1, let's say this is link 1. This is responsible to establish a communication between VNet1 to VNet2. Link 2 that gets created in the VNet2 is responsible to establish a communication between VNet2 to VNet1. So it's a two-way bridge that you're trying to create. It's a two-way communication line that you're trying to establish between VNet2 to VNet1 and so on and so forth. So I'll just go there into the peering and I will say this is link 1 and I will say traffic to the remote virtual network, meaning remote virtual network here it means it's VNet2. Do you want to allow the traffic? I'll say yes, I will allow. I want my VNet1 to communicate with VNet2 and it's saying traffic forwarded you want to allow. I'll just say this is default allow and this is none. I'll just choose the default option out here. Then it's again asking me for a peering link. This is link 2 and it is telling me okay fine, not a problem, this is link 2, great. Where is your remote virtual network, meaning where is the second virtual network that you want to connect to? This is East US2 and I'll say it is North Europe. Again, your virtual network can be in any subscription. You can choose your virtual networks from any subscription. You can choose your virtual network from a different resource as well. You can directly give your resource ID as well out here, but by default this is the only subscription that I have and I'll say this is the North Europe network. I'll just scroll down. It's telling traffic to the remote virtual network, meaning in the link 2 do you want to establish a connection between this virtual network 2 to virtual network 1? I'll say yes, this is also something that I want and I'll just go ahead and I'll say add. As and when I add, do you see what is happening? It says successfully added link 1 to link 2 and link 2 to let's say this particular network and it's now telling connected. If I go into the virtual network 2, again virtual network 2 is something that I did not even touch till now. If I just scroll down peerings, I'll just refresh this page out. It also has the link to establish out here, meaning when I was creating that particular network peering, it took care of establishing both the networks or it took care of establishing both the peerings out here. Just link 1 and link 2. Link 1 is from VNet 1 to VNet 2. Link 2 is from VNet 2 to VNet 1 out here. A both way or a two-way communication bridge has been established. So I'll say this one, I'll just go back and refresh this out. And the peering status now is connected. Now let's try this out once again. Virtual network 2 doesn't have a network or virtual network 2 doesn't have a public IP address. I'll just scroll down. I'll take the private IP address only. This is the only thing that I have. Again, the question comes back to you all. I'm a user who's trying to establish an RDP. Will I be able to connect to this particular machine? Will I now be able to establish a connection to this particular machine? There is a virtual network to virtual network peering established. So if I go ahead, give this private IP and say connect, can I establish a connection? Yes. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Peering link should give. So let's try that out. Let's see what it does here. I'm sorry. Can you please come again? Another peering. Between what? Another peering? That's already done. So if you look at this one, not really. So if you look at this one, I'll just answer that question. There is ECS to VNet. You have a peering link. So this link is pointing to the north ear of VNet. If you go to the north ear of VNet, and if I go into peerings, this link is connected to what? ECS to. Both of them are now established. Then why am I not able to do an RDP into the machine 2? If I do a 192.168.0.4, any port, again RDP by default works on 3389. So if you look at this one, in my virtual machine 2, if I go into the networking, RDP is by default working on a port called 3389. So I don't really have to mention what port I'm, let's say, establishing a connection to. Again, there's a lot of connections that I opened.
So, Kiran, in this case, we need a gateway subnet. Why means
We
we
need
are
a,
doing
a
inside of
gateway subnet. Okay,
yeah,
but why do
services
we
now.
need a? Okay, I mean, why do we need a gateway subnet out here? Because I have established a peering between these two, let's say, virtual networks, but I'm still not able to, let's say, go ahead and do the RDP. It's a peering between the virtual networks. So where am I trying to establish the RDP from? From my local on-premise, exactly. Very importantly, the first question that you have to ask your client is that, you know what, where are you trying to establish an RDP from? If the client tells it's a local laptop, then I'm sorry, you won't be able to establish an RDP because the peering exists between virtual network 1 and virtual network 2. It doesn't exist between your on-premise machine and the virtual network, not the virtual machine. I'll put this or point this to virtual network out here. And as someone said, if you want to establish a connection between your virtual machine and the virtual network out here, this is where a concept called gateway subnet, or this is where a concept called VPN comes into picture, virtual private network. Yes, you are right. Gateway subnet, need a gateway subnet to establish a communication between your on-premise and the virtual network. But between two virtual networks, you can have a peering link out here that works. Meaning, link 2 to link 1, it's already there. Link 2 to link 1 has already been there, established. Meaning, if I am a user who's already inside the virtual network 1, this was the earlier issue. Even virtual network 1 was not able to connect to virtual network 2 out here. I'll now try to, let's say, establish the same thing again. And it's now asking me for the credentials. So let me give the credentials out here. Let me see if I give the right credentials. No, I added one more bracket here. I'll say okay. And I am now into virtual network 2 or virtual machine 2 using virtual machine 1 as a jump box or a jump server, like the way we are doing yesterday. We were using traffic, or we were using load balancer yesterday. Today I am using virtual machine 1, getting into it, and from there I'm going ahead and establishing a connection with the virtual machine 2. Though they are in a different network, it will still work. Reason being, you have a peering that is established out here. You have something known as a peering which is established out here, but this connection will not work if I am a local user. Meaning, if I am trying for my local machine, Azure will route my traffic through the internet and try to, let's say, look for a public IP address. This will not work. This really will not work. Reason being, I don't have a connection between my local laptop and the virtual network directly out here, for which, as someone suggested, we need to come from something called as a gateway subnet. There's something called a gateway subnet. There's something called a VPN connection and a lot of things out here. So if I need to come from my local, then these are the concepts that I need to implement, which we will also see how to implement these concepts and all these things out. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? Uh, Actually, you do not even need a public IP out here if you have established a VPN connection already. But in this case, yes, there is no VPN connection. I at least need one particular public IP or something called as a bastion host. Something known as a bastion host, meaning if you don't have a public IP, there's just scroll down. There is something called as connect RDP SSH. There's something called as a bastion. If I say use a bastion host out here, what it would do is that it will go ahead and create a new subnet for me. I'll say create a bastion host using the default. It will create a new subnet for me, resource group, and this is the name of the bastion host, the virtual network, same virtual network, and it will also go ahead and create a public IP, which you should not do. In the organization, you won't even be able to create a bastion host out here. But I'm just, let's say, covering this concept as well as someone already asked this out. There's something called bastion. So you either need a public IP address or you need a bastion. If your organization is not allowing a public IP address or a bastion, then you should look to establish a connection from your local directly to the private IP of that particular virtual machine over something called as a gateway subnet, which is the concept that I'll also tell you what is a gateway subnet, how do you need to configure and all that stuff. So again, it's now creating a bastion. I'll show you how a bastion also works out. We'll also see how that works out again. It will take some time for to create this particular bastion. We'll come back to that once it's created. But while this is getting created, any other questions here? Anyone, any questions here? Once explain peering. So peering is nothing but establishing a link between two different networks. Pawan, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Can you please stay on
How
mute? I
many?
was just explaining. Okay, give me a second. I was explaining. I was taking a question offline. Please stay on mute till then.
Okay.
I'll come back to you again. Yes. So peering is nothing but a link between two different virtual networks. So if you want to let two different virtual networks communicate with each other, so by default, virtual network 1 cannot communicate with virtual network 2. Neither virtual network 2 can communicate with virtual network 1 because they are in two regions and two different addresses out there. If you want to establish, you establish something called as a peering link. So you go here inside the virtual network 1, go into a concept known as peerings and add a link. And once you add a link, it will ask you what is the link name and what is the link name to. And then it will also ask you what is your virtual network. You select this, you add this, you establish a communication line between virtual network 1 and virtual network 2. That is a peering link out here for you. Okay. Yes, someone else. Sorry, Rapavan, you can go ahead now, please.
Yeah. How many pairings we can have? We can able to add,
Any number of peerings. There is no limit. You can add a multiple number of peerings out here. There's no real limit out there.
and we generated our system IP address, and we created RDP now. Is it useful for pairing
Correct.
also?
Uh, when you created a system IP address, no, I did not create a system IP address. My system has been assigned with an IP by default by the network provider. So this is the IP that I was assigned by the network provider. And what I'm trying to say is that using this particular IP, I cannot I cannot establish a peering directly to that particular network or to that particular machine over a private IP address. I cannot do this. Reason being, this is a private IP address, and I am someone who's coming from the internet. So even though I have a peering, even though let's say I have a peering between two networks, it's only valid for those two networks, only valid for the resources that are running inside the network. My laptop is a resource that is outside the network, so it cannot establish a peering with that, or I
Then
cannot establish a communication with that. Hmm?
we don't have to create RDP, no? In
No, you don't have to
if,
really create the RDP. But I was just for the demo purpose, I was telling you, even if you have an RDP, you still won't be able to establish a connection. Again, you
okay,
don't even need an RDP connection out here. You can delete the RDP happily. You can come here, delete the RDP happily out here.
okay, thank you.
Again, Bastion is trying to take some time out here. Let this give it its own sweet time. You don't even need this particular RDP connection. You can happily delete this out. You can simply delete this particular RDP connection out here. Will not affect the connection between virtual machine 2. They will both still work. Yes, one more question that is there in the online chat is that if I don't plan to peer these two networks, can I have the same address range for both? Yes, you can have the same address range for both if you don't plan on peering them. If you plan on peering them, you need to have a different IP addresses or different IP address ranges out there as such. Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any more questions here?
Even for Bastion login, we don't need username password, right? While we are logging to the
You
private IP.
you will still need a username and password. You will still need the credentials. Even if you have a Bastion, you or if you have a private IP, whatever it is, you still need a credential out there.
Okay. Yeah, in this case, we cannot create the password now.
We can
While
create a Bastion. Yeah, I mean we can create the Bastion out here. The Bastion host can be provisioned. Again, if you see the Bastion is in an updated state. Bastion just gives you a public IP address within the same network. That's it. Bastion, the only concept of Bastion out here is that instead of going ahead and doing an RDP, you can directly go into your browser and do the RDP out here. That's it. That's the only advantage of a Bastion host, and it's a faster connection out there. So the only advantage of Bastion host out here is that it will give you again a public IP address in the same network. It will give you a public IP address, and you can connect to this particular public IP address using your browser and directly hit your virtual machine out here, or you can directly hit any virtual machines inside the same network out there. And if you see this, Bastion is now created, and here it is telling me what is the username, what is the password that you want to connect to, connection settings and all these things out. And if I give the username and password, if I say some username and password out here, if I say connect, Bastion will simply open up a connection. Again, it will take some time for the Bastion to be provisioned. Bastion will simply open other tab. Again, there is a pop-up blocked. I say always allow done. I'll connect to this one. Bastion will simply go ahead and open a connection out there. That's it. Instead of you coming ahead and doing an RDP, Bastion will use your browser and do an RDP out here. That's the only advantage of a Bastion. That's it. So now you are inside that particular demo VM North Europe. So if you had multiple virtual machines, you can specify which virtual machine you want to connect to. Bastion will allow you to connect. Again, Bastion is nothing but a public IP address. Bastion is nothing but a public IP host out there. You still need the credentials. And if you look at this, the only difference is that you are opening the entire RDP session from a browser. You have a browser and you're opening that particular RDP session from a browser out there. I'm sorry. Bastion is faster. Bastion is actually very faster because it's running from the network out there. You're directly connecting to that particular network. So Bastion is much more faster out there in terms of transferring the data, in terms of, let's say, looking at that particular connection. It's much more faster. We very rarely use Bastion in real time. Again, if you want to use a Bastion, you will have to allow some kind of a public IP address for that. So if your organization is not allowing for a public IP address, that's going to be an issue. Yes, anyone, any more questions? Again, one thing that I want to get into is that yes, this is peering good enough, but as a user, how should I allow my developers, or let's say the people who are working inside my organization, to establish a direct connection to this particular virtual machine without having to go through the public internet route? Meaning, I don't want to give you a public IP address, but I still want you to, let's say, go ahead and establish something known as a connection. That's where something called as a virtual network gateway comes into picture. There is something called virtual network gateway, and there is something called certificate based authentication. You need to install a couple of certificates on your machine, and you need to configure this out. You need to configure the gateway, and then once you configure the gateway, you'll be able to establish a direct connection from your VPN. Meaning, if you did work in an organization, the first thing that you do when you log in is open something called VPN, and you connect to a machine using this particular thing. Again, I do not have a VPN connection. If I did, there would be a VPN connection out here. I would have clicked on that particular VPN, and if I click on the VPN, it means that I'm inside that particular network. And if I'm inside the network, I will be able to establish something known as a private IP connections out there. This is called point to site connections. There's something called point to site VPN Azure. On what exactly it does. Again, if you see, a point to site VPN gateway lets you create a secure connection to your virtual network from individual client computers, like my computer, your computer, and all these things out. If you want to establish a secure connection, this is a point to site. This is where I want to get into. Firstly, let's say virtual network to virtual network peering is only limited to virtual networks. But if you want to establish, sorry, if you want to establish a secure connection from your network or from your own laptop, then you need to, let's say, think about something known as a virtual network gateway. And the concept here is called as point to site connection out here. Again, the difficulty in explaining this particular concept in a live class session is that it will take a lot of time. If I just go ahead, create that particular VPN, the VPN, or if I go ahead, just create this particular resource called virtual network gateway. This is an actual resource. If I say virtual network gateway, this is an actual resource out here. It's a very big resource. If I create this, the creation will itself take about 45 minutes of time. I'll again need to configure it. The configuration also needs some trial and error because we'll create some basic, let's say, routing out here. So the configuration will again take another half an hour of time. So it will take a lot of time. There'll be a lot of dead gap between, let's say, while I'm explaining it out. So what I did is that I recorded this particular session on how do you go ahead and create something called as a VPN to VPN peering, or sorry, a point to site connection out here. And I have given this in the form of a video out here. So there are just two sessions that I give it in the form of video, not doing a live session. This is one amongst that, and the other session would be on Octopus, very last thing. Or it's a tool basically that we need to use out there. So these are the two sessions that really stretch out there. I need to break things out in 3 to 4 classes out there, and it'll really take a lot of time to explain this out. So what I did is that I recorded this out, and you have a file called point to site.mp4 file. Just go to this link, download this particular file, and I have also given some documentation on how to go ahead in a very step-by-step procedure to create your certificates. Where do certificates come into picture? How do certificates and all that stuff? And I've also given some common errors that you'll face. That there is some common error that you face. How do you troubleshoot that particular error? I've also given some troubleshooting out here. How do you troubleshoot and all these things? So what I want you to do is go into this particular link. I'll paste this link online. Please paste it in the WhatsApp group that you have. If it's not pasted, please let me know. I'll go ahead and send it across to one of y'all. Please go ahead and send it across in the WhatsApp group. This is really beneficial. Go into this link. This is a public link out here. Click on these three dots. Download this out. Download this video, or you can just click on this video. You have a download button here. You can download this particular video out. Look at this video and try out VPN concept over the weekend. It will take some time. It will take a lot of trial errors. You will have to do a lot of trial and error to get this particular thing right. So please try this out over the let's say weekend. And on Monday, I'll take questions on this, and then we'll get started with the session. Yes, anyone? Any more questions here? Any questions here till here? Anyone? Any questions till here?
Hi Kiran, in my portal network watch RG is created. What is meant by that?
That shouldn't be a problem. Watcher RG will get created whenever you create a virtual network. This is just a tool which will help you monitor the traffic inside your network, which will help you diagnose if you have any issues, or which will help you resolve any issues and all these things. So shouldn't be an issue. This is of no charge. Azure will create this whenever you create a virtual network out there.
Okay, Kiran, thank you.
Okay. Can you please share the scripts? For that, firstly, you have to share the script with me on what your script is. How till where have you written that particular script out there. If you share it with me, I'll go ahead and share it with you. It's a two-way connection again. So please share it with me. Try it out. Let me know how is it going for you as such. Yes. Any more questions here?
Kiran, is there any
Yes.
additional charge for this Bastion service and this one
Yes,
VPN?
Bastion, yes, VPN, yes, VPN. If you look at the VPN out here, if you say virtual network gateway pricing, gateway pricing, you will have a pricing detail for it. And yes, this is chargeable. This is additional cost depending upon what kind of, let's say, a gateway that you create. So if you go for a basic gateway, it will cost you around 2 rupees. But if you go for an advanced gateway, it will cost you around 291 rupees per hour. It's very costly. So please use a basic service. The same thing that I've explained in the video. Please use the basic service out here. And also Bastion is costly. I mean, Bastion is cost effective. Reason being, Bastion is nothing but a public IP address out there. When you create a Bastion, you just get a public IP address or you just get an endpoint from which you can connect to it. And the same charges what applies to a public IP will go ahead and let's say apply to let's say this particular machine as well. So if you look at this, Bastion is a secure seamless connection within the Azure network without exposing a public IP, but underneath it will have a public IP address out there. So yes, it's a piece of software. Yes, any user can connect to user. Yes, provided you allow him to go ahead and let's say connect to it. If you give him the right access, if he's having the right access, the user can go ahead and do the Bastion out there. Is any more questions here? Mm-hmm. Right. Correct. Same thing. If you buy something in US and if you buy something in Europe, the prices are different because the local laws, the local taxes affect the prices. Same thing applies to Azure as well. Azure needs to pay an additional cost when it establishes a data center in Europe when compared to US. Depends upon the region, the taxation of that particular region. You are also charged the same thing out there. Okay, so that's it from mine today, guys. Thank you. Have a good weekend ahead, and please try this out in the weekend on what VPN is. We'll take the questions on Monday, and we'll talk about more concepts in it. Thank you, and have a good day ahead.